All right, good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley here, INN, World Report Radio, Tuesdays and Thursday nights on the Great Logos Radio Network. Okay, strap yourselves in because it's going to be a heck of a ride. Dr. Webster Tarpley back on the show, and I know that he's loaded. It's been about a month or so since we've had him on, and there's so much going on. Webster, thank you for coming back on to INN.
Always a pleasure, Tom, and thank you for your kind invitation. It's very timely.
Oh, very timely indeed, and that's why we like to have you on. We like to let the world catch up to you and then let you loose. So let's get started, Webster. I know we got a bullet point here of a list of things. Can we talk a little bit first about what's really going on in Iraq with this ISIS? Is this a cover over a legitimate revolt going on against the American puppet government, or is there more to it?
No, it's a secret army of the CIA, MI6, and Saudi Arabia, which is being used to overthrow a government which has been gravitating towards Iran. So this is something that you want to stay away from. There must be no bombing, no U.S. interference. If you're concerned about ISIS, what you can do is say that the sources of ISIS are all in Syria, and it would be important to help Assad of Syria deal with those. In other words, if anybody's going to bomb them, Assad knows how to bomb them, and indeed he has been bombing them, and he's been bombing places in Iraq. So the U.S. should not interfere. But let me just go through the basic profile. What is this thing, right? It's really Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, or Sham. Sham is the word they use for Syria, Damascus area, and so forth, right? So it's all prehistorical. What's that?
That's my organic alarm system. Don't worry about it. Keep
going off there in the background. All right. So what is it? First of all, it is owned by a member of the Saudi Arabian royal family, right? The Saudis, this monstrous, feudal, absolute monarchy from the Dark Ages, they have a hard time existing in the modern world. But in order to exist, what they do is to fund these Dark Ages militias, right? And this is just one of them. And in this case, the owner of it is none other than Abdul Rahman Faisal. You can call him Prince Faisal, but that actually it interferes with some others. He's got two brothers that you may have heard of. One is Saud al-Faisal, who has been the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia for many, many decades. And I always mention, I knew him in college. He graduated Princeton my year. We never saw him. He was always skiing in Switzerland, and there was always some question who actually wrote his dissertation and did the work, because notoriously these guys hate doing work, right? They're typical parasitical feudal nobility. They don't like any work. And then the other brother is Prince Turki al-Faisal, and Prince Turki has been ambassador to London, to Washington, and so forth. So we got the three Faisal brothers. They're all the sons of former King Faisal, but the one who does this is ARF, Abdul Rahman Faisal. Now, where do they come from? They're created by the U.S., the British, and NATO intelligence. And especially, we've had some articles about, March of 2013, last year. We had Der Spiegel of Hamburg. We had the London Guardian saying that there was a large training camp for rebels that were supposedly directed against Assad of Syria, and this was located in the Kingdom of Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan with King Abdullah. This is a U.S. puppet, but it's especially also an area of Israeli intelligence activity. So it looks like they were trained there. The instructors, U.S., British, French, possibly others. So now they've been thrown into the game. One of their debuts was the cross-border attack coming out of sanctuaries in Turkey. These ISIS people attacked Latakia last July, August, and that is the source of the cadavers that were put on display in the films that were issued for the Ghouta chemical weapons fraud stunt back in August of last year that brought the world to the brink of war. What they did was cynically kill Christian and Alawite children and then put them in trucks and then cart them over, or do the pictures nearby and then pretend that these people were the victims of chemical attack by Assad. Now, the other thing about it, of course, the leader, Baghdadi, Baghdadi has a 4-year degree, a 4-year diploma from the U.S. He was in U.S. custody for 4 years. People, the only way you get out of that is by becoming a double agent and or by being pretty thoroughly brainwashed. So like Shiri of Yemen, like Belhaj of Libya, like Kumu of Libya, right? The guy who did the killing at Benghazi. These are all people that have been reconfigured, redirected, retooled in U.S. custody and then sent back in to fight against the enemies of the U.S. Because
real quick,
Al-Qaeda is the CIA Arab Legion.
Right, real quick. When you say got a 4-year degree, you're speaking, of course, euphemistically. The guy's been black-bagged.
No, you got to remember, Guantanamo Bay is an academy of terrorism. It's a training base.
All right, so yes.
Everything else. And
exactly.
Even if you don't make it all the way to Guantanamo, you're still going to get out. The only way you get out is that you've accepted the task. Now, the reactionary, right, the dumb right-winger, as usual, comes along and says, "Oh, they fooled us. They got out. Now they're still fighting." Well, yes, of course, but it's the CIA that let them out, and generally speaking, they conform to their instructions.
Right. Well, that's what I meant. When you said a 4-year degree, you don't mean in some college somewhere. You were speaking euphemistically. They've been brainwashed in Guantanamo.
I'm trying to make people understand what should be obvious, but to many somehow isn't. Right?
There might be a couple who aren't. So go ahead. Go for it.
All right. So what is the point of this? Well, 3 coups, right? A coup against Assad, if they can. They're very worried because the rebels in Syria are losing. They've been kicked out of Homs. They've been kicked out of Aleppo. They've been driven into areas that are not very heavily inhabited. So they'd like to bring down Assad. If the terrorist rebels are losing on the Syrian front or theater, then they say, well, let's expand the theater and maybe we can relieve pressure on the Syrian terrorist rebels by attacking more actively in Iraq. And of course, the attacks have been going on since January. I have the New York Times and the Washington Post here going back to January when it was Fallujah and Ramadi that were taken over by these ISIS people. The other coup is against Maliki. The U.S. has hated Maliki, of course, for many years. The U.S. candidate for that job is Alawi, U.S. puppet. Maliki is much too close to the Iranians. Therefore, he's always been targeted. And by the way, remember, one of the ways you know that WikiLeaks was a CIA limited hangout operation was because of the specific attacks against Maliki that were included in that package, right? Remember, only people who were on the CIA enemies list got slammed in the stuff that Assange delivered back in 2011. So that's one. And then the third, and it may be hard for your listeners to understand this, but the other coup is a coup against Obama. And it's a coup by the insane, degenerate U.S. ruling class. And it goes something like this. The U.S. ruling elite, these predatory Wall Street financiers and oligarchs, are apoplectic. They are beside themselves with rage. They wanted to bomb Syria last August, September, and Obama looked like he was about to give it to them. And then when the British House of Commons reneged, Obama, with the help of Putin, of course, decided to pull back from that war. So that was one war that we didn't have. Then we have, instead of bombing Iran, which was the demand of Netanyahu already, a year and a half ago, instead we got negotiations with Iran. So that entire area, right, the specific neocon Israeli-obsessed side of things, they're apoplectic. And then we've also got Russia, right? So the whole ruling class is beside themselves with apoplexy once again, that Obama has not essentially engaged in some kind of clash or confrontation with Putin in defense, of course, of the Kiev fascist regime.
As he so shamelessly did for them in Libya.
Yes, but of course, from Obama's point of view, that was a low cost engagement, right? And I think he also learned from that. My argument is that Obama.
Hold on, Webster, because that music means we're going off the air. 1 second. We'll be right back with Webster Tarpley right after this. All right, good friends, welcome back. Let's get right back to it. When Dr. Tarpley is with us, we like to absorb and hear as much as we can. Webster, before we go on, you made the point about this training situation. So many of these people get brought in, get black bagged into our system, then they get the brain scrambled, and they go out and they actually help the great Satan, figuring they're going to get back to him in the end. What about that situation? Isn't this an historical problem when you get agitators that you think you can control? They thought they could control the Nazis too, right? But then
exactly. The very good. The leading example is Hitler, right? They said, well, he's programmed to go east and only east, and he'll never go west. That is why the fall of France in June of 1940 was such a shock for the British appeasement strategy, right? Because the idea was you'd send Hitler east, and he'd deal with Stalin, and they'd destroy each other, and then you could have another 100 years of the British Empire. It didn't work. Now, in this case, it's very interesting. We have a warning issued by Ayatollah Rouhani, the president of Iran, where he addresses the Saudi rulers, right, these degenerates, and he says to them, look, you may think that ISIS will stop at your border, but we think it's much more likely that if they get to your border, they're going to keep coming, and they're going to come after you and kill you and wipe you out. And that will be the fall of the Saudi monarchy. Just go back to this case that I always cite when I have to deal with these Saudis. Philippe Égalité. Philippe Égalité was a member of the French royal family of the House of Orléans, but he was somewhere in the succession to the throne of France. And when the French Revolution got going, he's the guy who organized the storming of the Bastille, which was a provocation that he set up because he thought that he could essentially ride the tiger, right? That he could take over the revolution and run it and become dictator and serve his own power interest that way. He ended on the guillotine with his head chopped off. So that's a warning to all those degenerate Saudi princes. But perhaps more to the point now, Obama. You look at the coverage, right? Pick up the New York Times, pick up the Washington Post, turn on Fox News. You've got all of these Republican congressmen, especially, whining and screaming that Obama is too passive, that they want to see action. Now, they've often been challenged to say, what the hell do you want, right? Is it war? Is that what you want? McCain essentially says it. He wants war. McCain has said, I want to bomb Iraq and I want to bomb into Syria. And I'm sure once it got going, he would try to bomb into Iran as well. But the idea is that there's a desire in the ruling class for a coup d'etat. Remember, in the first term of the modern presidency, the president is controlled by Wall Street through his need for money to run for re-election, right? That's the control mechanism. In the second term, that does not exist anymore, and therefore they use scandals, and that's the key. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Clinton-gate, and all the rest. And what's happening to Obama right now is very clearly predictable, and it's not a jinx. It's an oligarchical control mechanism. So I would urge people not to be quite as dumb as Americans often are. Look at what's actually happening. People are screaming to Obama, we want to attack, we want to bomb. And Obama is essentially saying, look, I'm a weak, passive executive, of course. He's cowardly, of course. He's all that. But he's also saying these foreign adventures would not be good for me, for Obama. He's not talking about public interest or national interest. Of course not. But neither are these other guys. The other guys are actually concerned about that even less. Obama was, in many ways, the most evil deployment of the ruling class back in 2008, 2009. But he has long since been outclassed in evil and horrors by all kinds of other people, but especially the Tea Party and the reactionary Republicans. And you can see, look at McCain, right? He's an absolute raving lunatic. And Romney, I think, is pretty much that, although somewhat more behind the scenes. So I'll give you another example. This thing today with the recess appointments in the Supreme Court, it's 0 to 9, right? 9 to 0. 9 are against Obama and 0 are for Obama. Now, to me, that means the ruling class is restive. The ruling class is interested in a putsch. And the putsch is, of course, David Petraeus and all sorts of generals, mainly Petraeus, But then this group around Petraeus, right, the neocons, the Kagans, Tim Kagan, the Institute for the Study of War, Frederick Kagan, American Enterprise Institute, General Jack Keane, you see him on Fox, he works for Kim Kagan, and then Robert Kagan, top advisor to Romney, and his charming wife, Victoria Nuland, with her sewer mouth, right? Blankety blank, the European Union, you've all heard it, right? So this group, and you see the Petraeus people are in full mobilization. A guy called Mansour here was quoted in the Washington Post last week on the front page. And this is a guy who's written laudatory studies, a little bit like Broadwell. Remember her? She did a thing more personally on Petraeus. But the task of this guy Mansour is to show that Petraeus is the greatest strategist of all time. And of course, he's not. He's anything but. But he does embody the plan of the Bilderberger Group, which is where he was at the meeting, right, in Denmark. Petraeus embodies the threat of Bonapartist quasi-military dictatorship in our time. Not Obama. Let me get that across to people. People are really dense. Obama is pretty much a spent force, but Petraeus and company are full of criminal energy. So this is their deployment. It's also interesting to go back, right? Washington Post had written, Secretary of State Kerry and Samantha Power at the UN wanted to attack Syria. They couldn't do it, and they brought in outside help. Who's the outside help? General Petraeus and General Jack Keane and Ryan Crocker of the I guess it is Ryan Crocker or Crocker, whatever the current Crocker is called, who was the ambassador during the surge, right? 2007, 2008, 2009. And of course, what those guys did is pretty much what you see today. It was not the U.S. fighting, and triumphing. It was this Kitsonian strategy, right? You play one group against another, gang versus counter gang, right? Sunni revival in Anbar against Muqtada Sadr and the Mahdi army. Make them fight themselves, and then your occupation forces can be decisive. So I think that's the Iraqi situation in a nutshell. You want to end it? The solution would be this: an ultimatum by the United States to Saudi Arabia saying, stop it. No more money, no more logistics for these killers. Same thing goes for Qatar. Same thing goes for Kuwait. Same thing goes for United Arab Emirates and Oman. The so-called Gulf Cooperation Council has to get an ultimatum saying, we know what you're doing and you should stop it. So no bombing. You don't need bombing. And then, make sure that Assad has everything he needs and let the Iranians do what they can do. And you can roll up this ISIS, I think, pretty well.
Well, that assumes that the United States doesn't approve of what they're doing. I mean, how independent are they?
I'm talking about somebody who might be in power, myself. In other words, I'm trying to tell you what a real president would do. Okay?
Yes, I understand.
I try to think this way a lot.
Okay. But now, in the meanwhile, how far off the ranch are those Saudis willing to go? I mean, aren't they acting with the permission of the Wall Street controlled president?
I think there's a pretty obvious problem there because it's a huge humiliation, right, for the U.S. Certainly humiliation for Obama, right? If he had any brains, he might do this. Obama went to Saudi Arabia back in April. And there was some element in this which was not all sweetness and light. And you've got to understand that there was also a clash between the Qatar people, right, Doha, and the Saudis, right? And that was a real clash about the fact that the emir of Doha was going way too far, right? That the Saudis were getting frightened. And another aspect of this is, you see the Al Jazeera people that have been thrown into jail in Egypt? This is a punishment richly deserved. I have a friend out there in the Colorado Rockies, and he's watching Amy Goodman put out free AJ, free Al Jazeera staff or free Al Jazeera reporters. He's putting out jail Al Jazeera reporters. Take a look. Yeah. And the idea being, those guys built a set, remember?
Yes.
They built a replica of the Green Square in Tripoli.
Well, all the liberals in New York ought to know this by now.
Yeah, right.
The precious Al Jazeera, baloney. You were played like a fiddle. On this subject, though, Webster, what about the ousting of Bandar Bush? Isn't that part of this tumult that's going on?
I don't know. You think he's ousted?
He's been fired.
He's dead so many times.
He has been fired now. He does not run the Saudi intelligence.
Until I see the body, I'm not going to be convinced.
No. He's alive, they say, but he does not. He got fired. He's mishandled the whole Syrian thing.
I'm full of skepticism.
Well, they got a new guy. They got a new guy running it, and even there's an Israeli general that got thrown out over it, I think, too. But
it's possible. I mean, there are huge tensions, but let's not kid ourselves. What we need is a full cutoff of all logistics and money going to these killers, and that includes the Nusra and the Islamic Front. And the Free Syrian Army is now to be found in Sweden and the Netherlands and in the Gulf states. They've been completely wiped out inside Syria.
Yeah, well, that's they got a great name though, the Free Syrian Army, huh?
And that's who Kerry wanted to arm. Remember, and therefore any arms that they had gotten would now be in the hands of these lunatic killers.
What is the end game in Syria? I mean, are we on the downhill slope now?
Destruction of the modern state, and this is also important for your listeners.
No, the end game for Assad. For Assad.
Is to crush the rebellion and go back to normal life.
And how close is he to doing that?
I think he was getting rather close, and that's why we see the unleashing of ISIS this year, right? One wave in January, and then the wave that we've seen now since the beginning of June, right? Because he was winning, absolutely winning. And that was considered unacceptable. And I should have made it clear. When Kerry and Samantha Power called in Petraeus and Keane and Crocker and said, let's work together, the result is what you're seeing. The result is unleash ISIS across the north with the help of Turkey, with the help of Jordan. The French and the British are in it. NATO intelligence is in it. And this is what we have to defeat. But again,
and this is time for the break.
From Obama. Obama is lucky if he gets a briefing of what has been done the day before.
We'll be right back with Dr. Tarpley after this. All right, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio. In the house tonight, Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley. And we've got a whole hour left to go with him, so it's going to be as interesting as always. And I just want to bring it up. On Tuesday night, Gilad Atzmon will be back on the show as well. We asked Gilad to come on and talk about this protest against the Federal Reserve going on in Germany. And why are they being smeared as Nazis and anti-Semites? Very, very interesting. But back to Dr. Tarpley. Webster, what do you say we move on now to Russia and Putin and Glaziev and that sort of thing? Or do you still want to say some more about ISIS?
By all means. Again, the main thing on Iraq is no military action, no bombing, but build up Assad. In other words, work with existing governments, right? And eventually you'd want to have a peace conference with Syria, with Iran, with Russia, and these Saudis and these other characters would have to be there too, and the Israelis, right? And that might get things going in a positive direction, right? So the idea is the U.S. finance oligarchs, and the British even more, go into this with their own evil plan. But this is now significantly out of control. In other words, you're dealing with a significant factor of chaos, which is a degree of freedom, so that don't just sit there and say, "Oh, it's all fixed," right? No, don't do that. Get in there and put forward ideas, and above all, attack the people that are demanding more war. Attack the McCains, the Lindsey Grahams, people like this, right? And it ought to be evident to people, the Republican Party are incurably warmongers, incurably. And little Rand, right? Little Rand, at the beginning of the Russian crisis, Rand Paul he thought he could play a kind of a semi-isolationist card. And then he saw the pro-war hysteria of the majority Republican base in Iowa and places like this. And then he began scuttling over in the warmonger direction. And there you have it, right? He's now, he seems to have made peace with drones and God knows what. The only thing Rand will tell you is whatever happens has to go through Congress. So thanks a lot, right? I have no confidence in this Congress, so that guarantees absolutely nothing. All right, but now let's move on, because now we have Ukraine, right? This is extremely dangerous. Let me introduce it in the following way. Last Monday and Tuesday here in Washington, there was this U.S.-Russia forum, and this was held, the opening day was held in the Hart Senate office building. If you go into the newest of the Senate office buildings, on the top floor, the 9th floor, there is a large space which is used as an auditorium. So here we had the Russian ambassador, we had all kinds of important scholars and experts and spooks and so forth. If you want to read about it, you can see that the Daily Beast took this occasion to slander me. Take a look. And Accuracy in Media, one of the reactionary writers over there, also decided to slander me for being present at this thing. But here was the thing. Professor Stephen Cohen, who was at Princeton and then NYU, he's the husband of Katrina vanden Heuvel, the owner of The Nation, right, who I've been critical of. But the useful thing about this power couple here, Cohen and vanden Heuvel, is that they are against the idea of a new Cold War, and they're very aware of the tremendous danger, so much so that we had Cohen basically saying the following, that Putin is under tremendous pressure inside Russia to do more because the killing continues, right? The fascists of Lvov and Kiev are killing the people in Lugansk and Donetsk and those areas, and this is simply going on, right? And it's simply, the West doesn't care. 2 Russian reporters killed. West doesn't care, right? 1 Al Jazeera gets sentenced to jail in Egypt. The world is ending. But 2 Russians killed there, nothing, not a ripple. And an Italian killed, and another Russian, and a Frenchman wounded, nothing. So the word from Cohen is Putin is under pressure, and you can see it. It's not a secret. You can see Sergei Glaziev, who is part of the circle around Putin. Right? Putin keeps a kind of an array of advisors to get different points of view, but they're also people whose ideas are often then become policy. With Cohen, he's saying that Glaziev, and you can see it. You can look on my Twitter. You can see this tape. Glaziev is calling for a no-fly zone, right? That there's got to be air interdiction to stop this killing. And then Cohen goes on to say he fears that if this crisis goes on, we will have tactical nuclear warfare, tactical nuclear weapons being used. And I have to say, I'm very happy to hear this. This is what I've been saying essentially since 2004, right? That Ukraine is the most dangerous place on earth because it's the only place on earth where you're going to have, within likelihood, nuclear forces clashing. If you have, for example, Polish NATO troops coming into Ukraine from the West, behind them stands the U.S. nuclear deterrent. And if you have Russian forces coming in from the East, well, behind them, the Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missile and much else. So there it is. So I thought that was a rather stark warning from Cohen, right? And he also pointed out that he personally has been silenced and vilified, right? He's been, I'm afraid the people, a lot of the people who become hysterical about this have this idea that Putin oppresses the gay community. I think this is much exaggerated. In other words, I don't see any evidence of anything beyond a law that is sitting on the books, which has not had very much practical effect. And in any case, you're talking about World War III, so maybe that deserves a certain amount of attention, and I hope it will. Now, what I tried to do in this thing with a couple of questions that I was able to ask is to call attention to the work of academician Sergei Glaziev, who is an economist, he's a political figure, and again, he's one of these advisors to Putin. And the word from Glaziev goes like this. He says, look, if we are hit by another round of sanctions, sector sanctions or anything else, then the response would be, first of all, to say, dear London and dear New York, if you cut us off from trade, we can't pay our debts, so we will renege. We will repudiate many hundreds of millions or many billions of dollars of loans from U.S. and British banks to Russia. Another thing is to dump U.S. Treasury securities, of which I think they had about $500 billion, probably somewhat less than that now, maybe 200 or 300 million billion. I'm sorry, in these bonds, right? So they would dump those. But here's now the main thing: they would have capital controls and exchange controls. Are you with me?
Yeah, that's
capital controls and exchange controls. You've been strangely silent.
I'm enjoying it. I'm letting you go. There. Yeah, no,
capital
we're
controls.
Here.
No. I just want to know if we're still connected. Capital controls and exchange controls. This is to defend the ruble against a panic run organized by London and New York using credit default swaps and such stuff, right? And then the main center, and this is, I think people should understand this, right? People who have been concerned about the Federal Reserve. What he says is the Bank of Russia, the central bank, is nothing but a satellite of the U.S. Federal Reserve, because the only way the Bank of Russia prints rubles is if they have dollars to cover it. It's a kind of a dollar reserve standard, if you like, which I think is a very bad idea. And so does Glaziev. He says we should mobilize, we should nationalize. He doesn't say that, but this is what he's recommending. We should take control of the Central Bank of Russia, pull it out of the hands of the Federal Reserve and so forth, and begin issuing national credit, low interest, long-term loans for infrastructure, great projects, manufacturing, trade, agriculture, and so forth. They already do have some kind of a system where they can get 2 to 3% interest on foreign trade, right? They have subsidized that much. But the rest of it is still this crazy, suicidal free market claptrap, which was imposed by the U.S. and the British under Yeltsin, right? And the changes in policy that have come under Putin, the area of change that has been slowest and the least satisfactory is precisely finance, economics, and so forth. For many years, we had this guy, Kudrin, Kudrin, a neoliberal. We also had German Gref, Gref, another part of Putin's group. And those people, with the head of the Russian central bank is Madame Nabulina. And this madame has been dancing to the tune of Bernanke and Yellen. So what he's proposing is dirigism. And that's what one of the more intelligent Russian newspapers said. That's dirigism. That's also what I stand for. Now, the standard slander, when I asked a panel of these experts, right, I basically went through a short version of what I just said, right? Look, capital controls, exchange controls.
You mean at the Hart office building, or
at the Hart office building? Yabos.
Thank you. Clarity. Okay. Go for it.
So I said, look, Mahathir Mohamad in 1998-99 proved that with capital controls, exchange controls, you came out of the Asian contagion faster than if you did it any other way. So those two things, getting control of the central bank for national credit purposes, and then these other sort of economic defense measures. If you push Russia any further, aren't they going to do this? So there were two people. One was an American by the name of Wayne Merry, who was he's a veteran of the State Department and the Pentagon. And he said that he fervently hopes that the Kudrin faction will defeat the Glaziev faction. Right? The thing you have to know about Glaziev is that he tends to represent also the Siloviki. The Siloviki are the power ministries, right? The army, the secret police, the interior ministry, right? The border troops, these people. So the strong nationalists, right? People like my friend General Ivashov, right? You look on the internet, you can see me with General Ivashov there in Brussels. And then we had another guy, Leonid Gozman, of the Union of Right-Wing Forces, right? Soyuz Pravich Sil. And these are really extreme characters. They were part of Yeltsin. There was a guy called Nemtsov, who was the head of this party. Nemtsov, he was part of Yeltsin. He was sort of the extreme right wing, but neoliberal again, free market, Milton Friedman, all this garbage, right? Austrian school in some respects. And this Gozman said, Glaziev is crazy. Glaziev is crazy communist. So they were apoplectic, okay? And what I saw from this is they hate Glaziev as much as they hate Putin, or maybe more.
Maybe more. We got to go on a break. Hold on. And that's, by the way, is probably the fastest way to get to a nuclear exchange. Shut down the private bank. But we'll be right. All right, good friends. Let's get right back to it. Dr. Tarpley is with us. We've been through Syria. We're going through the Ukraine. Now we're talking about the ultimate battle. You know, economics. Wall Street versus an independent Russia, and that's where we kind of left off. And the prescription, as was proposed by Glaziev over there, is to deprivatize their privately held central bank, part of the Federal Reserve System, no?
Yes, Glaziev, right? It's Glazyev. Glaz means an eye. I mean, sometimes you'll see Mr. I, EYE, but that's just because the machine translation can't understand, you know, what's going on, right? But yes, right now, the momentum towards sanctions has slowed, but this could change literally at any point. And there was a faction fight, and is a continuing faction fight, between the neoliberals, led by Medvedev, but with Kudrin and Greff and others, and then the Siloviki, with Glaziev being one of the leading nationalists on the scene. And this, of course, is fascinating for us, because this is the only way that I can see that the system of privately owned central banks can be terminated. And it's not going to be terminated by simply dissolving, you know, abolishing, ending the Fed. No. It's going to be the nationalization, the deprivatization, the federalization, right? So that you're not having a central bank that serves banks, but a Hamiltonian national bank that has to serve the entire economy, full employment, rising standards of living, and technological modernization. So those are all the things. And Glaziev writes about this stuff. He says, look, we have to have the normal Russian company has to borrow at 8 to 10%. You know, why should that be? Why don't we have low interest? And here, it's similar here in the United States, right? The zombie banks either don't lend to industry, or they do so at exorbitant rates, and therefore people can't get business loans for actual tangible physical production, right? The prejudice of the bankers is all in the direction of derivatives and similar swindles, right? So this is a way to do it. So if the Anglo-American mad dog imperialists continue in their aggression vis-a-vis Ukraine, this could occur. And again, the thing to do is not to be afraid of it, but to prepare yourself for, if this happens, we're going to need a hue and cry to imitate it, right? That's what this would be. It would be a way to establish in our time, in a very important country, needless to say, that the central banking system is a failure because it's privately owned. It does not respond to the public interest. It is not a creature of the state. It's a creature of a private financier oligarchy made up of sociopaths. Now, related to this, if we can just change gears a little bit now.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I'm interested to see how it's related to this. I'm hanging on the edge of my seat.
In other words, if you want to get back to national banking, right, you got to have some idea of dirigism. And dirigism, this is the word that's brought up by Glaziev's supporters. And again, his opponents are completely bankrupt. All they can say is communist, right? And it makes no sense, because he's not proposing to expropriate anybody. He's not proposing to nationalize anything except the central bank, right, which ought to be, I think most people would agree, it ought to be a public institution dedicated to the public good rather than a central bank with concerned only about the welfare of bankers, right? And we've seen it fails, right? It's failed all during the 100 years that it's
fails the people. It's very, very good deal though for the bankers.
But it's not, because it brings on continuous depressions, right? The Federal Reserve is one of the key institutions responsible for the crash of 1929, for the world derivatives panic of 2007, 2008. So the selling point of the Federal Reserve was, with this, we'll never have panics and depressions again.
We're not going to do it. And the biggest one of them all came right after they got control.
It failed. Again, the 1929 one, and then the current one. So the 07, 08, which is still going on. All right, but now, dirigist institutions, right? Right now in the Congress, there's the question of the United States Export-Import Bank. And I have had in my program at the top of Tarpley.net, you can see a little box. It's a red box, and it says, Emergency Program, Stop the Depression. And if you look under point 2, which is largely concerned with financial reforms, revive the power of the Export-Import Bank is what I put there. And here's the idea. This is an institution which provides not even loans in most cases, but credit guarantees, credit insurance. If you're a U.S. exporter and you want to sell something to somebody, say, in sub-Saharan Africa or the poorer countries, Bangladesh or Pakistan, right, South Asia, the thing that you run up against is that if you have to turn to a zombie banker, they will demand, 20, 25%, because they'll say, we've got country risk, we've got all this other stuff. What the Export-Import Bank does is it says, okay, you, zombie banker, can make the loan at a much lower rate of interest, and we will guarantee that it will get paid back. So instead of 25%, it'll go down to 5 or 6% maybe. And what it means, therefore, is that if the loan is defaulted on, the U.S. government, through the Export-Import Bank, will pay. But at the worst phase of 07, 08, this was about 1% of all loans blew up. So that's about as bad as things have ever gotten. And right now, we're told through the hearings on Capitol Hill this week, it's about 1/4% of these loans go poorly. Now, it ought to be obvious to everybody, the primordial interest of Wall Street is to wipe this thing out. This is a New Deal institution, 1934, Franklin D. Roosevelt, right? It's practically the 100 days, almost. And Wall Street doesn't like it because it keeps interest rates on export financing low. And it allows, it's about 2% of all U.S. exports are financed through the Export-Import Bank, but they happen to be the high-tech ones. Above all, airplanes and, other advanced technological products. So if you want to have an advanced technological sector, you need this thing. There's also something that the Republicans never talk about, which it's called the balance of payments deficit, right? The U.S. right now is running a balance of payments deficit of about $50 billion a month. So it's 600 billion, 0.6 trillion per year. And you'd think that is actually more dangerous from the point of view of the currency than the national debt. Republicans, reactionaries in general, they're obsessed with the national debt, totally ignore the balance of payments crisis, even though the latter is ultimately more dangerous in terms of panics because it's worldwide, you can't control it. Now, the Republicans are attacking, in particular, Jeb Hensarling of Texas. This is a reactionary Tea Party predator. And he's the head of the House Financial Services Committee. He presided over these hearings this week. So he gets up there and he says, corporate welfare, crony capitalism, corruption, on and on and on. And this is absolute nonsense. The best way to sum it up is doing all the things that it does, right? The Export-Import Bank, it has about 150 billion loan cap at the present time. That's as much as it can lend out at any given time. It makes money for the federal government. The federal government gains $1 billion a year through this whole activity. So it's not hurting the budget, it's helping the budget to the tune of $1 billion. But there are two things. The word is unilateral disarmament, okay? There's a Chinese export-import bank, which is 4 or 5 times as big as the U.S. one, okay?
And they're laughing all the way to their bank.
Laughing.
We got to take a break.
Not only they're laughing, they're paying. They're paying, and let's see how they're paying.
And this crazy Tea Party guy is helping them out by keeping us underwater. We'll be right back with Webster Tarpley, friends. We got to take a quick break. We got 2 more segments with him, another 30 minutes. We'll be right back. All right, good friends. Speaking of the city of London and the Anglo-American oligarchy, that's a great song from Fairport Convention. Anyway, let's go back with Webster Tarpley. Webster, we've got another half hour left in the show, and I know you want to speak about the whole Tea Party situation that's been going this week.
Let's focus on this export-import bank.
Why don't we finish up there? Go ahead.
Call your congressman and tell them that we want the export-import bank, right? Because it's hundreds of thousands of jobs. Nobody knows exactly how many, but this is one of the few dirigistic elements, right? Strongly, obviously dirigistic, that survive in the U.S. federal government. And why is Hensarling and his cronies, right? Boehner is in favor, I guess, of abolishing it, although he doesn't say so. And the new guy, right? McCarthy, the one who replaced Cantor, he's also now against the Export-Import Bank. And here we have in the Washington Post of today, Charles Lane grounding the Bank of Boeing. So they say, the main beneficiary is Boeing because they export jet planes. Yeah, so let's have other high technology exports and get back to that rather than abolishing the ones that we have. Because again, the Chinese one is four times bigger. The Canadian one, for a much smaller country, is 3 times bigger. France has something called COFAS, which is a system of credit guarantees. Germany has the Hermes credits. Brazil, Russia, everybody has this. So what's going to happen now is with these libertarians, this Hensarling reactionary, we're going to have no export-import bank. Now, here's what I think. I think this guy's working for the Chinese. I think he's essentially on the Beijing payroll, right? He's a neo-Maoist, Hensarling. And here's how. Under Citizens United, the dark money can flow into the dark pools, right? And nobody knows. And the obvious danger with Citizens United that most people, I think, have sort of forgotten about is foreign money. And what I did on my own radio program, I did a study a couple of weeks ago of the Polish Republic in the 1700s and how this oligarchical system was brought down. And under the Poles, this Polish Republic, it was very obvious. There was a French party, there was an Austrian party, there was a Prussian party, there was a Russian party, right? So the whole country was divided. Now you look at the U.S., it's obvious. There's a British party, there's an Israeli party, there's a Chinese party, and I think there was whoever did the lobbying to have China restored as a normal trading partner about 14 or 15 years ago, I would say is probably on the payroll. So you can look at this, and I think the sociological research about this is virtually non-existent. But how would you know if you had a Chinese party, a Chinese faction, pro-Chinese faction in the House of Representatives? You'd have to start by looking at these policies. And I think with Hensarling, this has now reached the point of insanity, right? Because there is no reason for this, right? You're getting $1 billion a year out of the Exim Bank into the federal budget. You're increasing your exports. You've got these jobs that you otherwise wouldn't have. What is the objection? What's the beef? Oh, it's corporate welfare and crony capitalism. If you go back to somebody like Henry Carey, right, top economic advisor to Lincoln and the better part of the Republican Party in the 1860s, 1870s, you see that the Philadelphia faction that Henry Carey represented was centered on a high technology export industry. And in the center of this was Baldwin Locomotive. Baldwin Locomotive was one of the great American export industries, and it shipped locomotives, right? The rail traffic of, a large part of the world ran on Baldwin Locomotive, right? So you can see that there's a definite logic in the way this stuff works, right? If you have high technology export industries, you've got to promote them because everybody else is promoting them, but also because it is right to promote them. This is exactly what a government ought to do. And then finally, humanity as a whole benefits because it stimulates the high technology exports, again, going into sub-Saharan Africa. That's one of the Exim banks, it's legally mandated to pay special attention to sub-Saharan Africa. I think that's a great idea, right? Time for the Cape to Cairo fast rail, time for the Dakar to Djibouti fast rail, and then connect the Nile with the Congo through a canal system there in the center of Africa. It's not that much. And then you've got an internal waterway. Got to build a few locks and all that. Right?
So
but
Webster,
this is the path of development.
If I may, this is great. If I may encapsulate, basically what you're saying is first of all, it happens to be true because I've been in this business myself. It's very difficult if you manufacture in the United States and you're shipping overseas, especially depending on certain countries, to Russia, places like that. You're always warned, oh my God, you're not going to get your money back, la, la, la. And a government has a lot more power than you do to get your money back, and there's national agreements and everything else. So it makes total sense that a proactive government that wants its own citizens to be healthy is going to say, look, we'll mitigate that for you. We'll go ahead. We'll guarantee it. We'll back it up. What does that do? That cuts the loan sharks out who've been using that as an excuse to use exorbitant rates of interest, which they do get from the Boeings, I suppose, but they don't get from the smaller industry where a lot of people are employed. So those people are in. And then to your point, the Chinese are laughing. Yeah, sure. Don't export to us. That's more we can make for ourselves internally.
They're printing copies of von Hayek and Milton Friedman and God knows what. And remember, one of the costs of being a libertarian that's often hidden, or being a reactionary Republican, is the cost of learning Chinese so you can take orders, right? Because that's where it leads. And I can't imagine that people really want this if they think of it. So
hey, free market, the almighty buck, wherever it goes, and that's what you're absolutely right. You better start learning Chinese because in an ultimate free market, if that's the way it's going to go, that's what you're going to have to do.
Anyway, the other thing is, even in Hensarling's in his district in Texas, the business community is up in arms because they want this. And then, as I was looking the other day, they want the Exim Bank to exist. The situation right now is, if the House doesn't do something by, let's see, what is it, 90 days from now, so July, August, by September 30th, October 1st, right, the new fiscal year, the Export-Import Bank will die. It'll be gone. And from 1934 till now, but only now did we get a Maoist, a follower of the Little Red Book like Jeb Hensarling. And again,
Chinese fifth columnist.
Whether he knows that he's paid by Mao and by the Maoists and the Beijing people, I don't know whether he does. But I see money going into dark pools, and I'm sure it's Chinese. And again, if you have sociologists, right, you got to challenge them. Why don't you tell us about the Chinese faction in the House, the British faction, right? You will find some stuff about the Israeli faction. A lot of it is, hysterical, overdone, right? But there is such a thing, to be sure. And you can look at other groups, right, that are undoubtedly represented. Brazil, right? Does Brazil have enough money to buy a few congressmen? I think they do. And they have this thing called Embraer, right? You've probably been in some of these planes. And the U.S. could compete with that, but not without the Export-Import Bank. So I think this is a great opportunity. There's a business community that wants this, and they're right to want it. It's a good thing. I would also address leftists. If you look at the hearings, you can find them on C-SPAN. You'll find Maxine Waters is in favor of the Export-Import Bank. Congressman Gregory Meeks is in favor. It looks like the Black Caucus in general is in favor of it. Congressman Brad Sherman of California, a pretty decent progressive, he's for it. And
where does Obama come down on it?
Obama is cowering as usual. I don't know. I suppose the administration is probably going to be for it, but that was the one thing that did not emerge from my study. And you're right, I should have tried to find that out. But you could see where these other people were standing. So there's a tremendous vulnerability to the Republican Party, that they're literally attacking their own business base. And what it shows is that this is ideology gone wild. The other thing about Hensarling, he wants to be Speaker of the House. Hensarling is essentially thinking, if I destroy the Export-Import Bank, I will get more money from the Koch brothers. There may be, I'm just guessing now, that there's some story in here where Koch Industries wanted a loan from the Exim Bank.
All right, hold on. We'll be right back. All right, good friends. Let's come down the home stretch now. Coming down the home stretch with Webster. Okay, Webster, why don't we finish up with this, and then let's give us the latest on the whole, it was a tumultuous week. We had an election on Tuesday, and the Tea Party seemed to do good, and then it seemed to not do good, and the mainstream media was jumping all over the ladder, weren't they?
Let me just first ask you to contemplate the horror. This Jeb Hensarling of Texas, the 5th District, who is now the head of the House Financial Services Committee, he is determined, and this is a big national problem, to destroy the Export-Import Bank. And with this, he thinks he can please Wall Street and then undoubtedly the Koch brothers. And I am asserting Chinese money also comes into play, because otherwise this is beyond belief. In other words, as one of the black Democrats in this hearing said, I can't believe we're discussing whether to destroy the Export-Import Bank when everybody else in the world is trying to gear up their national export finance and guarantee mechanisms. Right? Again, the Germans are 4 to 5 times bigger, the Canadians 3 times bigger, the Chinese 4 times bigger, or whatever it is. Right? This is absolute insanity. This is raving insanity. But now you can see what he wants. He figures that Boehner is not long for this world. This character, McCarthy, may be a loser. Hensarling as Speaker of the House with Chinese money. A Maoist could become the second in line to the succession to the presidency. Somebody who's on the Chi-Com payroll. How about that? Hensarling on the Chi-Com payroll, whether he knows it or not. And that's going to become the Speaker of the House, and that's going to be 2 heartbeats away from taking over the country. I'm sorry, this is a nightmare. We've got to do something about this. So this has got to be stopped. And this also applies to other Republican races. Let me just point out, for people who are in Nebraska, the obvious choice for you is Dan Burdorf, the website being Dan for Nebraska, who is a strong dirigist. He's in favor of taxing Wall Street. It is the Tax Wall Street Party ticket that he's running on. You should go to Dan for Nebraska and look for where his teams are in Lincoln, Nebraska, but also in other cities where you can sign up, right? You can sign up to get him on the ballot, right? Sign the petition to get Dan Burdorf and the Tax Wall Street Party on the ballot. So that's one obvious one. Let me also mention Randy Credico, right? The very colorful and unpredictable candidate for mayor last year, ran as a Democrat, then as Tax Wall Street Party. He's now running to give the Wall Street puppet Cuomo a run for his money in the Democratic primary, right? This woman, Zephyr Teachout, this is not a serious alternative to Cuomo, whereas Credico is, because he's got the main thing. Don't just complain, tax Wall Street, right? Hit him in the La Banza, hit him where it really hurts, and then use that money to solve the obvious problem. So the general answer is the Tax Wall Street Party. But now we just had Thad Cochran in Mississippi, and what this comes down to, I think, if you look at the Cantor Brat near Richmond, Virginia, a couple of weeks ago, and now we've got the McDaniel versus Thad Cochran in Mississippi. This is a split inside the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish rite of the Freemasonic lodges here in the United States. Because you look at Thad Cochran, he is somewhat courtly representative of the school, but this is exactly Trent Lott, Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms, a somewhat more likable guy, but the institutional origin is that. And then you got these other people, right? Bratt and our friend McDaniel, and they're obviously a more radicalized, more scurrilous wing of these same Freemasonic lodges. But the important thing now is that they're at each other's throats. And you can see what the idea is, right? Lifeboat ethics in the ruling class, or in this case, lifeboat ethics inside these Freemasonic lodges. In other words, the depression is so severe that not every faction will survive. Some factions are going to get triaged. They're going to get tossed overboard, and therefore that's why these fights are so acrimonious. Anyway,
1 second, Webster. Clarity. When you say the depression, you mean the depression that they're feeling psychologically,
no.
Or the economic? Okay, very good.
Economic depression, which has gripped this entire planet since 2008, which we have never come out of. We are in a world economic depression, exactly like the 1930s, but in some ways worse than the 1930s. And that is this economic decadence, right? The reason the pie is shrinking, the reason that lifeboat ethics are operative in the ruling class is that some people are going to get the axe, right? That's why Wall Street wants to, gobble up, loot, sack the Export-Import Bank and whatever businesses would have dealt with them. But now look, the way that this was done, of course, this was clever. We're told that Haley Barbour might have done it, right? Or Haley Barbour working through Democrats, right? You remember Haley Barbour? He was the head of the Republican Party for a while. When he left Washington, it was 50-50 whether he would be indicted or whether he would go back to Mississippi and become governor. And I think that's what he did. He became governor just in time for the hurricane. Remember
the portly guy that got his house wiped out in the hurricane.
Yeah, right. Haley Barbour. All right. But now you look at these leaflets, right? The appeal was that the Tea Party is racist, and very interesting that if you voted for McDaniel, he would defund food stamps. Okay, SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, and that McDaniel would cut federal aid to education. Now, these are beyond question. In terms of the federal aid to education, in Mississippi, it turns out that almost all special education, any child with a disability, right, with cognitive problems, whatever that is, right, according to federal law, the state has got to cough that up, but they do it with the help of the federal government because otherwise it simply wouldn't be there. Mississippi, the poorest state, right? Where does Tea Party ideology get you? Well, that's the poorest state. I'm sitting here in Maryland, which is the richest state, having passed Connecticut a little while ago, right? And you can just look at
That's because you're so close to Washington.
Well, Connecticut is not that close to Washington, and now
Connecticut's closer to Wall Street, but I think Washington's taken over.
Anyway, I think that's too simplistic. A lot of it has to do with actual policies, right? Because there's no.
It's a joke, Webster. It's a joke.
Virginia is just as close to Washington, and somehow this benefit has not rubbed off on them, and it's not that much bigger. But here, look.
I tell you, it's a tough crowd.
I'm proposing that food stamps are now the third rail of American politics. You touch it and you fry. And that's what happened to our dear friend McDaniel. He wanted to cut food stamps. Remember, Ron Paul wanted to cut food stamps by 2/3. Now, the problem with that kind of stuff is that kills people. The average libertarian is so stupefied and ideologized that they cannot comprehend the human costs of these policy changes that they propose. However, that is not an excuse, right? When you stand in the last judgment, you're going to be asked, did you support cutting food stamps by 2/3? And if the answer is yes, then things may get very hot for you. And in this case, it was the food stamp issue and this question of aid to education. And generally speaking, is the Tea Party racist? Well, one thing is, do they have racist outbursts, right? Do they have racial slurs? They have, quite a few. They've had a lot of it. But the thing that I would point to is if you look in my book, Obama, the Postmodern Coup, if you go back to the Carter era, you had, I think it was actually Hubert Humphrey, saying that the new racism of the 1970s was not overt racism, but to attack federal programs that benefited poor black people in inner cities. That was a form of racism. I absolutely agree. That is the essence of racism. What could be more racist than to support cuts to food stamps that will kill people? Because that's what they'll do. People
they support a lot of poor white people too, don't they? Maybe even more?
In terms, yes, of course. But that's not the way the reactionary individual sees it, right? The reactionary individual is obsessed with the idea that A, blacks, B, Latinos, and C, illegal immigrants are coming to steal your wealth. That's the mental map. That's the hallucinatory nightmare vision of the world that they have. And this since they're emotionally crippled in this way, they respond as you see.
And the real thieves laugh all the way to their own banks.
Right? Who are these, bankers sitting in London and Wall Street? Yes, precisely. They're looking for a group that they're familiar with, that they've learned to hate the mannerisms of or other peculiarities of, and this gives them emotional satisfaction of hating such people. But in doing so, they cut their own throats. Maybe that's what's the matter with.
That's the trick. That's the trick, to get them to cut their own throats and do it happily. And,
That is cultural populism. And remember, Hitler was a cultural populist. It depends on hating the characteristics of some other group rather than asserting an actual positive interest of your own. So I would say that the black voters of Mississippi were absolutely justified and fully rational in every way in saying, I don't want a Tea Party lunatic, another Tea Party lunatic in the Senate. Let's go out and...
Well, that's it. We only got 10 seconds. So, Tarpley.net.
Right?
Thank you, Webster. Tarpley.net. I'll let you go right down to the end. All right? Well, go to his site.
Sham. Sham is the word they use for Syria, Damascus area, and so forth. Right? So it's all prehistorical. What's that?
That's my organic alarm system. Don't worry about it. Keep
going off there in the background. All right. So what is it? First of all, it is owned by a member of the Saudi Arabian royal family, right? The Saudis, this monstrous, feudal, absolute monarchy from the Dark Ages, they have a hard time existing in the modern world. But in order to exist, what they do is to fund these Dark Ages militias, right? And this is just one of them. And in this case, the owner of it is none other than Abdul Rahman Faisal. You can call him Prince Faisal, but that actually it interferes with some others. He's got two brothers that you may have heard of. One is Saud al-Faisal, who has been the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia for many, many decades. And I always mention, I knew him in college. He graduated Princeton my year. We never saw him. He was always skiing in Switzerland, and there was always some question who actually wrote his dissertation and did the work, because notoriously these guys hate doing work, right? They're typical parasitical feudal nobility. They don't like any work. And then the other brother is Prince Turki al-Faisal, and Prince Turki has been ambassador to London, to Washington, and so forth. So we got the three Faisal brothers. They're all the sons of former King Faisal, but the one who does this is ARF, Abdul Rahman Faisal. Now, where do they come from? They're created by the U.S., the British, and NATO intelligence. And especially, we've had some articles about, March of 2013, last year. We had Der Spiegel of Hamburg. We had the London Guardian saying that there was a large training camp for rebels that were supposedly directed against Assad of Syria, and this was located in the Kingdom of Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan with King Abdullah. This is a U.S. puppet but it's especially also an area of Israeli intelligence activity. So it looks like they were trained there. The instructors, U.S., British, French, possibly others. So now they've been thrown into the game. One of their debuts was the cross-border attack coming out of sanctuaries in Turkey. These ISIS people attacked Latakia last July, August, and that is the source of the cadavers that were put on display in the films that were issued for the Ghouta chemical weapons fraud stunt back in August of last year that brought the world to the brink of war. What they did was cynically kill Christian and Alawite children and then put them in trucks and then cart them over, or do the pictures nearby and then pretend.
All right, good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley here, INN, World Report Radio, Tuesdays and Thursday nights on the great Logos Radio Network. Okay, strap yourselves in because it's going to be a heck of a ride. Dr. Webster Tarpley back on the show, and I know that he's loaded. It's been about a month or so since we've had him on, and there's so much going on. Webster, thank you for coming back on to INN.
Always a pleasure, Tom, and thank you for your kind invitation. It's very timely.
Oh, very timely indeed, and that's why we like to have you on. We like to let the world catch up to you and then let you loose. So let's get started, Webster. I know we got a bullet point here of a list of things. Can we talk a little bit first about what's really going on in Iraq with this ISIS? Is this a cover over a legitimate revolt going on against the American puppet government, or is there more to it?
No, it's a secret army of the CIA, MI6, and Saudi Arabia, which is being used to overthrow a government which has been gravitating towards Iran. So this is something that you want to stay away from. There must be no bombing, no U.S. interference. If you're concerned about ISIS, what you can do is say that the sources of ISIS are all in Syria, and it would be important to help Assad of Syria deal with those. In other words, if anybody's going to bomb them, Assad knows how to bomb them, and indeed he has been bombing them, and he's been bombing places in Iraq. So the U.S. should not interfere. But let me just go through the basic profile. What is this thing, right? It's really Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant, or that these people were the victims of chemical attack by Assad. Now, the other thing about it, of course, the leader, Baghdadi has a 4-year degree, a 4-year diploma from the U.S. He was in U.S. custody for 4 years. The only way you get out of that is by becoming a double agent and or by being pretty thoroughly brainwashed. So like Shiri of Yemen, like Belhaj of Libya, like Kumu of Libya, right? The guy who did the killing at Benghazi. These are all people that have been reconfigured, redirected, retooled in U.S. custody and then sent back in to fight against the enemies of the U.S. Because
real quick,
Al-Qaeda is the CIA Arab Legion.
Right, real quick. When you say got a 4-year degree, you're speaking, of course, euphemistically. The guy's been black-bagged.
You got to remember, Guantanamo Bay is an academy of terrorism. It's a training base.
All right, so yes.
Everything else. And
exactly.
Even if you don't make it all the way to Guantanamo, you're still going to get out. The only way you get out is that you've accepted the task. Now, the reactionary, right, the dumb right-winger, as usual, comes along and says, "Oh, they fooled us. They got out. Now they're still fighting." Well, yes, of course, but it's the CIA that let them out, and generally speaking, they conform to their instructions.
Right. Well, that's what I meant. When you said a 4-year degree, you don't mean in some college somewhere. You were speaking euphemistically. They've been brainwashed in Guantanamo.
I'm trying to make people understand what should be obvious, but to many somehow isn't. Right?
There might be a couple who aren't. So go ahead. Go for it.
All right. So what is the point of this? Well, 3 coups, right? A coup against Assad, if they can. They're very worried because the rebels in Syria are losing. They've been kicked out of Homs, they've been kicked out of Aleppo, they've been driven into areas that are not very heavily inhabited. So they'd like to bring down Assad. If the terrorist rebels are losing on the Syrian front or theater, then they say, well, let's expand the theater and maybe we can relieve pressure on the Syrian terrorist rebels by attacking more actively in Iraq. And of course, the the attacks have been going on since January. I have the New York Times and the Washington Post here going back to January when it was Fallujah and Ramadi that were taken over by these ISIS people. The other coup is against Maliki. The U.S. has hated Maliki, of course, for many years. The U.S. candidate for that job is Alawi, U.S. puppet. Maliki is much too close to the Iranians. Therefore, he's always been targeted. And by the way, remember, one of the ways you know that WikiLeaks was a CIA limited hangout operation was because of the specific attacks against Maliki that were included in that package, right? Remember, only people who were on the CIA enemies list